his first book to the Christians, which were throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. And in the first chapter, read 15 and 16, and then we'll go over to chapter 2. He had to say this in 15, 16. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy also in all your behavior. Because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. In chapter 2, 9 and 10, says, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Well, good evening to everyone. It's great to see everyone out again, whether it's the first or second time today. It's great to see you all out this evening with another chance to worship our God. I want to thank Matt for the songs that he selected for us this evening, talking about being holy. And I want to look at that kind of idea as we look at 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33. Quite a popular verse of watching our company. I'll break that verse down into three parts there, and even for the behind me with the picture of the three lines of not being misled or deceived, bad company, and what it does with corrupting good character, looking at those three things. But before we start, just to kind of offer an illustration, if you see behind me, that is a Rubel Griffin vulture. As far as vultures go, it's not that ugly, I think, but it's a unique bird in the sense that it's the highest flying bird in the world. It flies up to 37,000 feet high, so that's about 8,000 feet higher than Mount Everest. It's about the height of a commercial jet plane when it's coasting, and so it's extremely high flying. And the reason it does this is it uses the natural jet streams in order for it to fly around and cover as much distance as possible with as little amount of effort as it possibly can use. Which sounds pretty efficient and nice to me. And so that's its purpose and what it's made to do by our God. But when this vulture is flying at this level of 37,000 feet, and it happens to see another bird at its same level, whether we look to the left or the right, and see another bird at the exact same level, it must be another one of these vultures, a Rupel Griffin vulture. It must be another one, because there's no other bird that's able to fly that high. So it must be another Rupel Griffin vulture. And if it were to find itself flying and it's surrounded by pigeons, then the point is that it's flying too low. It's not being as efficient as it could be, covering as much ground as it could be. Now, you may be wondering why I'm telling you this, and that's probably valid. But I want to look at this illustration with the idea of us being the vultures, and then with the pigeons, as I mentioned, being the other company, the bad company that we face and we are around in our lives. So if you would, look at 1 Peter as we just were with our scripture reading that Mike read for us. In this illustration, with us being the vultures, we're also supposed to be holy, as God is holy, as it talks about in 1 Peter chapter 1. And as 1 Peter chapter 2 talks about, that also Mike read, that we're a chosen people, we're a royal priesthood, and how we're supposed to live our lives is that as we fly, we're supposed to fly high, fly to this standard that God has laid out for us. And we are to watch who we are around, what company we keep. Is that vulture flying with other vultures, or is it flying with pigeons? That kind of analogy. And when we look at it in our company, it's not that we're not to associate with the world, not to be around the world, because we're all sinners. We can't leave the world, and we'll talk about that later. But it's not that we're better than them, because we've all made mistakes. We're all sinners. But it's because we've answered God's call that we're supposed to maintain this high level of flying, this high level of being as we've been called to be, as we've been chosen to be, as we've been set apart to be. If you would turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 6. just to read a few verses there. 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 17. Those verses say, "Do not be mismatched with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and lawlessness share together? What does light have in common with darkness? Or what harmony does Christ have with Belial? Or what does a believer share with an unbeliever? Or what agreement does the temple of God have with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as God said, 'I will dwell among them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people.' Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says the Lord, and do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty." Beautiful verses, especially the latter two. But talking about not being mismatched, not being unequally yoked, some of your versions may say, with unbelievers. And it's because these two groups are opposite. And the writer here, Paul, uses illustrations of light and darkness as one of them. Now, for example, if there's a room in complete light, there's no chance of darkness. If it's a room that's completely dark, there's no light in there. Those two do not go together at all. Now, then again, the Bible isn't saying we can't be around worldly people. 1 Corinthians 5 will talk about that idea in verse 9 and 10, specifically in 10, where it'll say, right in verse 9, Paul will say, "I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. I did not all mean with all sexually immoral people of this world, with the greedy and the swindlers, with the idolaters. Then you would have to leave the world." And he continues on with his thought there. But the point I want to get is that we are in the world. We can't leave it. We can't just go away from the world. It's something that we are a part of. And if we were to get away from sin, we would have to leave the world, with just that not being possible there. It's not that we look and see the world and we think it's like a hungry bear and we run away from it, right? But it's the world is something we're a part of, and something we are going to have to deal with. Choosing our company is something we need to do. But kind of back to that vulture illustration is, we like to call vultures God's cleanup crew. Right, and they like to come down, and that's where they have to go down is to eat, and that's what they do to eat the cleanup, I guess. And so they fly down, and they have this choice to make, though, is once they go down, are they going to go back up? And it's the idea that as the vulture comes down, it maintains its identity as a vulture, is that it comes down, it eats, and it goes back up. It maintains its identity, regardless of what's around. And for us as Christians, it's the same idea of us maintaining our identity regardless of who we're around. And I'm a Christian in the church building, I'm a Christian at school, I'm a Christian at work, I'm a Christian wherever I may be, is that I'm maintaining that identity. It's not that also that I'm getting too close to my company. So if this vulture flies down and again is surrounded by pigeons, it doesn't go, I'm going to be a pigeon from now on and live their lifestyle. It's not that I'm going to get so close to the world as a Christian that I'm going to change my identity of who I've been chosen to be, that instead I'm going to become this worldly person and live opposed to God. And so it's just that the idea there that we're not around the world, or we are around the world, but we're not a companion of it. It's not companion. We're not being in companionship with that. There are situations where we are a part of the world and we can't get out of it due to it may violate a commandment of God. But in those situations, it is about being an example to them. But in most situations, we can avoid and get out of those situations that bad company arise. And just to, as the question says on the top of the slide, what is bad company? I want to look at our source material tonight, 1 Corinthians 15, if you would turn there. This offers really the context of what is bad company that we see and why. When you read this chapter, the verse of verse 33, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals, doesn't necessarily, it obviously flows together because it's God's word, but it's not, it almost makes you wonder why it's there. And so when you look at the context, I think that really shows some power in it. So verse 12 is where we kind of get the idea that Paul's going to carry out through the rest of the chapter, where he says, now if Christ has preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? So he's responding here that there are some saying there is no resurrection. And he's going to continue talking about how it's an essential teaching that not only Christ has risen, but if we believe, live that life, we will also attain that resurrection. Verse 33, jumping down, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals. Verse 34, sober up morally and stop sinning, for some have no knowledge of God. I say this to your shame. And so for us, it's that importance to make sure that we are teaching those that do not know about God. But in the context here, if we believe in the resurrection as Christians, then the bad company in this context is going to be those that do not believe in the resurrection. The ones that believe or say it's not real, that's the bad company in this context. And what bad company also does is it's contrary to God's way. It's going to stop us from being set apart. So really, bad company isn't just in this context those that don't believe in the resurrection, but it's also anything contrary to God's way, causing us to live our lives in a way that is against what God has called us to do. And also with that idea, we like to look at bad company in terms of physical people, and that is deservedly so, being around physical people and how bad that can be. But we also need to understand that there is so much more options of finding bad company. For example, if I were to pull out my phone right now, I could go on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, right? I'm not on all of those, but for example, right? YouTube, Disney Plus, Hulu, I could go wherever, right? TV, cable television, whatever you may have, all of it. And in seconds, I can find bad company, right? I can open Apple Music, Spotify, Pandora, if you're into that, and I can immediately find bad company in those songs, right? And it's something that it's not just who we're around physically, but even those that you may never meet, right? These quote-unquote famous people, is that they certainly can affect us in how we think and how we view other people, if they may become an idol or what they say may become an idol to us. And so bad company is not merely just who we're around, although that is a valuable part, but it is certainly what we surround ourselves with on a daily basis. The music we listen to, I think, is certainly a big one. All of them are, but certainly we're around music a lot when we're in the car, certainly. And what we're surrounding ourselves with is extremely important, because what the bad company is going to do is it will corrupt good morals. And I want to look at a few examples of Bible characters that their company is going to corrupt them. And first, looking at King Solomon. Solomon was a very good man for most of his life. We know that he's famous for asking God for wisdom when he could have asked for anything, and God's going to give him wisdom along with the riches and honor that he didn't ask for. Israel and Judah are going to be very secure and prosperous in those days. People from all over the known world are going to come over to see Solomon, to hear of his wisdom. Absolutely beautiful. He builds the temple of God, and they're going to talk about that for years to come, even after it's gone. Absolutely beautiful time period. And Solomon did a lot of amazing, good, wise things, but his company affected him as we look at 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 and 2 is going to talk about his downfall, is that Solomon loved many foreign women. It's going to list of the different nations that those are listed from. In verse 2, we'll talk about that these nations are from, these groups of nations are which the Lord had told the sons of Israel not to associate with them, nor will they associate with you. They will certainly turn your heart away to follow their gods. So God had warned them years prior, and Deuteronomy 7 is an example of that. We'll look at that later, of God saying, watch who you're around. So here I want us to see what Solomon gets himself into in verse 3 through 10. It says, he had 700 wives who were princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to follow other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of his father David had been. For Solomon became a follower of Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and of Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, did not follow the Lord fully as his father David had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Cheremosh, the abhorrent idol of Moab, on the mountain that is east of Jerusalem, for Molech, the abhorrent idol of the sons of Ammon. He also did the same for his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him regarding this thing, and he was not to follow other gods, but he did not comply with what the Lord had commanded him. So we see this company, and I want to touch on the amount first. As we like to, when we see Solomon, we like to focus on the 700 and the 300, right? And 1,000, that's a huge number. And yes, it is. I get that. But I want to focus on, regardless if it's 1,000 or if it was 1, is what bad company does. And so we see here is it's going to turn a very righteous, wise man away from God. Whether he's going to build these altars for these idols. He's going to become a follower of them. All these things that he does. And it destroys his character, destroys who he was because of the company he decided to keep around him. And it's not something that bad company doesn't just come affect those who are weak in faith. This was a very strong, wise man. That bad company absolutely destroyed who he was. And we're going to see that again even with his son in 1 Kings chapter 12. If you want to flip maybe a page over. Israel is going to ask Rehoboam, they're going to say, could you lighten our load, lighten our workload that your father had put on us? And we see in verse 5 that Rehoboam's going to say, well, give me some days to think about it. Verse 6 and 7, he's going to ask his father's wise men, or your version may say elders, what he is to do. And the elders are going to tell him in verse 7, if you will be a servant to this people today and will serve them, grant them their request, speak pleasant words to them, then they will be your servants always. Verse 8, we see that Rehoboam's going to ignore them, ignore the wise wisdom advice that he was given, and then he's going to ask his friends that he grew up with. And the young man in verse 10 will say this. They say, this is what you should say to the people who spoke to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us. You shall speak this way to them. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Now then, my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, yet I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So Rehoboam's choice here to listen to his friends, and the consequences, what's going to happen is this kingdom that had been united is now going to split into two, and he's going to lose the majority of the kingdom and become the king of Judah, and it's all because of the company he decides to listen to. And even then, when you look at the wise men, what they told him is the idea of that they're going to serve you and the importance of that. They're going to follow you. That the friends don't mention that. What they want and focusing on is how Rehoboam's going to look so much tougher, right? Your pinky is going to be, as it says, thicker than your father's waist, whatever that's supposed to mean. But how amazing that idea is, that you're going to be so much tougher, so much stronger than your father. And this authoritative figure that we see that's going to be there is of his company and what it did to him. Last example just for today, but there's certainly more, is Judges 16 with Samson. Samson's a quite interesting study and story. We see a lot of things with him, especially in kids' classes, and deservedly so. Very interesting and neat character. We see verse 16, though, we're going to see yet again what bad company does to good people. Samson's going to love a woman named Delilah. See that in verse 4 of chapter 16. A lady that he shouldn't have been around in association with, much like Solomon, part of the nations that God said do not associate with. So what Samson's going to do here is he's going to end up telling her the secret to his strength, with that being his hair, and that he valued this relationship with this company more than he valued his relationship with God. And because she told him this, she was put up to do this by the Philistines here. His hair is going to be cut, and he's going to lose that strength, and he'll be put in this position where he's ultimately going to die because of this. Now, he's going to get this moment of redemption in verse 30 of chapter 16. And you can read that on your own time. But it is another story, another example of what he surrounded himself with destroyed his life in that instance. Literally put him in the position to die. And so in all three of these examples, what we see is that bad company, what it does is it corrupts good morals. It corrupts good morals every single time, right? In one instance, it literally what caused the death of the person. The other one destroyed large parts of their lives, destroyed their relationship with God, all because these poor choices and what they decided to do is what bad company does, is corrupt good morals. But I want to get to this point of 1 Corinthians 15:33, as we try to look at least, well, not try, we did, looked at bad company and what it is, that bad company corrupts good morals. But I want to look at that first part of the verse, is do not be deceived. Is that how often we are deceived that we think that bad company won't corrupt good morals, when in fact it does. If you look at 1 John chapter 3, 1 John chapter 3, verses 7 through 10. These verses also will start out with the idea of make sure that no one deceives you. Verse 7, it'll say, little children, make sure no one deceives you. The one who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. The one who practices sin is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. No one has been born of God practices sin, because his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin continually, because he has been born of God. By this the children of God and the children of the devil are obvious. Anyone who does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor the one who does not love his brother and sister. So the one who practices righteousness, the one who practices sin is of the devil, the one who practices righteousness is of God. It's very clear and evident on who those two are. And the fact that it's not the righteousness in my eyes, it's not what I define to be righteous, what I define to be okay, but it's what God defines to be okay. Especially as Christians, we are to live in that way, that we are defining what we think is right and wrong based on God's view. Not what the world defines as right and wrong, but what God says is right and wrong, what is sin and what is not sin. And it's very evident to see if they are living for or against God. And again, the reality that there is not this middle ground here, that is you either for or against God, either heaven or hell. As the reality, you're either living for or against him, you are either living for good or evil. In Revelation 3, Jesus talks to the church of Laodicea and calls them lukewarm. And what he says to them, and I believe it's verse 16, that he'll say, I would wish that you would rather be cold or hot, right? Rather be one side or the other than being lukewarm, than being in the middle, if you will. And it's what's going to happen to them that are lukewarm is Jesus will spit them out, he'll say. And it's the importance of there's not this middle ground. It's either you're living for God or against God. The people in the middle ground on the day of judgment don't get to go to this third place where they, you can think about it and, get a second chance. This is it. This is it. This is one time that you get this choice. And it's you're either going to have one of two eternal destinations that we are going to have. Matthew chapter 6 talks about, while Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, that you can't serve two masters. You're either going to hate one, love the other, or you're going to love one, hate the other. It's the reality of the company that you have. You're either around people living for God or you're around people that are living for the devil. That's period. At the end of the discussion. That's it. And yet again, as we talked about earlier, there are some situations that we can't avoid the bad company without violating a commandment of God. There's some situations that may occur. But in most scenarios, we can avoid that bad company. We can avoid that time. And oftentimes, we do try and justify being around our bad company. We try and justify being around those people, that I can go to that party, I can go to that bar, I can go hang around those that curse, that get drunk all the time, that they're the cowards, they're abusive, they're addicts. That won't affect me. If you turn to Proverbs 24, and how often we either do this currently or do this now. Proverbs 22, verse 24. This is just one example of being around another example, I should say, of what being around bad company does. Proverbs 2, 24 through 25 says, do not make friends with a person given to anger, or go with a hot-tempered person, for you will learn his ways and find a snare for yourself. I want you to notice, it says, do not make friends with person given to anger, or you will learn his ways. It's not, you might. It's not, if you're a really strong Christian, you're going to be all right. It's not that if you know all the books of the Bible, you can quote all of it, whatever you want to use. Right? It's bottom line, you will learn his ways, and what will happen in 25 is it'll be a snare for yourself. And it's the fact and the absolute certainty that bad company corrupts good morals. There is no maybes, there is no sometimes, it's every time. This is what bad company does, is it corrupts good morals. And when we look back at Israel, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 talks about, we are told the mistakes of Israel so we can learn from them, not to crave evil, not to go after the same temptations they went after. If you look at Deuteronomy 7, as we kind of talked about that earlier, if you would turn there. Just the importance of us watching out for this company that we keep, because it will destroy the Christians that we are called to be it's how so often we justify it. And that's, I think, really the point of do not be deceived. How often we justify being around these people, being around this friend, because I've had them for a long time, ever since I was a kid, because they're all I got at school, or they're all I got at work. The bottom line is what they do is they corrupt good morals. And are you valuing that relationship more than God, and the danger of that. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through, we'll just read 3 through 6. It says, "Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your sons away from following me, and they will serve other gods. And the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you. He will quickly destroy you. This way you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars." And he'll continue on. You need to destroy these things. Verse 6, "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his personal possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth." And so God clearly tells them, destroy these people. Because what they're going to do is they're going to turn you away from me. You know what exactly happens? They don't destroy all of them. Their hearts are turned away, and they're going to be punished for what they did. Exactly what God said would happen if they didn't happens. And it's the exact same thing for us. So we cannot be deceived, because bad company is going to corrupt us if we allow it to be a part of us. And the importance of that. That the reality is who we let around us will affect us, regardless of the situation. There isn't a go-around for that. Who we allow to be around us is who we're going to oftentimes be like. It could even be the ones that you decide to be around, it's allowed to be your close companions, are likely the ones you're going to spend your eternal destination with. Likely going to be the ones that you become, the ones you tend to be like. We can all look at our company and define who that really is. But oftentimes, that's likely what it's going to be, is you're going to end up being like your company. Mark chapter 8, verse 36, 37, will bring off this idea of what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And it's the important thing that you could chase after this relationship, the prettiest girl, the most handsome guy. You could chase after all of these great things. You could chase after this relationship just so you can fill that void in your life, that job that you may want, the coolest position you may have, all this money, all these things. But if you lose your soul, there's no profit in that, regardless of what it may be. Just so we can fill that void with bad company and destroy our soul. It is something we need to certainly watch out for. That bad company destroys good morals. We see it with Bible characters. There's certainly Christians today that struggle with it. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't struggle with it. It's all something that we either have faced or will face in our lives. But it's important to watch out for that company. There's that old quote, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future," it says. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Is look around at who you are, it's likely that that'll be who you become. And watching out for who you are around. And I saw the study, and a few of these studies, and it was talking about the amount of young people that leave the church. It's talking about the age of 18 to 22, but we can even make it 25, whatever it may be. And that this is looking at Christians from a whole, right? So this is including a bunch of other false doctrines in this idea of Christian. But the idea is that from the age of 18 to 22, is a lot of Christians are going to follow away in that group. They're going to fall away from that group. And I have zero doubt in my mind, it's from the company that they keep. And I said, today, looking at the Church of Christ, that number that it'll suggest, I believe, is a little high. But I certainly can see, and I've seen in the high school class, kids that have come before me, they're not here anymore, right? I can think of people that went to FC camp, that went to these other churches, right? Not coming to church anymore, right? There are people right now coming to my mind. And it's the reality, and I have zero doubt in my mind it's because of the company they kept, at least in part. Obviously, it's their choice. But certainly, the company they keep can absolutely destroy us. And it's so important to watch out for that, for who we have in our lives. Because our friends, it's great to have friends, but if they lead me to hell, what's the point in having friends? importance of having friends that are pushing us to closer to God. And that's the importance of having friends that are going to push us to living for him. That we are not being deceived, we're not being misled, but we're serving him and making sure that the people around us are serving God. That's the ones that are close to us are serving God. And the focus of that. We need to make sure that we watch out for that. It's our choice on who we're going to let around us. We need to choose wisely. Obviously, in total, be a good example regardless of who we're around. But watching who we let in our close circle is extremely important. But tonight, as we offer the invitation, if there's that opportunity, or if there is that opportunity, if you would like to be baptized and to be baptized into the body and become a member of God's church and serve him, that opportunity is available now because of what he's done for us. And we're so blessed that he has done that for us. If we need prayers of this congregation, we need help in whatever we may be facing, or we have questions, now is certainly a good time to ask them. But if you may need anything at this time, don't hesitate in asking, and please come forward as we stand and sing.